So many times we find ourselves stressed out, worried, and exhausted because we are trying to handle things that were never meant for us to carry. We try to fix problems, change people, and force things to happen in our timing. But let me tell you something today. God never asked you to do His job. One of the biggest sources of stress, anxiety, and frustration in our lives comes from trying to control things we were never meant to control. We think that if we just try hard enough, plan well enough, or worry long enough, we can make everything go exactly the way we want. But the truth is, we are not in control. God is. And the sooner we accept that, the sooner we can experience real peace. Think about how much time we spend trying to control things. We try to control people, our spouse, our kids, our friends, our co-workers, hoping they will do what we want, think like we think, and act like we believe they should act. And when they don't, we get frustrated, upset, or even angry. We try to control outcomes, manipulating situations, overanalyzing every little detail, and stressing over things that are completely out of our hands. But the reality is, no matter how much we try, we can't control everything. And even if we could, we'd only wear ourselves out in the process. The problem is, when we live this way, we're actually putting an incredible amount of pressure on ourselves. We start believing that if we don't make the right decisions, if we don't say the right things, or if we don't do enough, everything will fall apart. But let me tell you, this kind of thinking will drain the life out of you. It will keep you up at night, rob you of your joy, and make you feel constantly exhausted. That's not how God wants us to live. Another way we try to control everything is by refusing to trust God's timing. We want things to happen now, and when they don't, we start to panic. We take matters into our own hands, trying to force things to work when it's not yet the right time. Have you ever prayed for something and felt like God was taking too long to answer? Maybe you prayed for a promotion at work, and when it didn't happen right away, you started trying to make it happen yourself. Working overtime, pushing for recognition, even comparing yourself to others. Or maybe you've been waiting for a relationship to change, and when you didn't see progress, you started trying to fix the other person, making suggestions, dropping hints, and trying to control their actions. But no matter what you do, it just doesn't seem to work. That's because God never intended for us to carry this burden. We were never meant to control everything. And the more we try, the more we struggle. It's like swimming against the current. You can fight and fight, but eventually you're going to wear yourself out. Sometimes the reason we try to control everything is that we're afraid of what might happen if we don't. We don't want to get hurt. We don't want to experience disappointment. We don't want to feel like we've failed. But here's the truth. Trusting God doesn't mean everything will always go the way we want. It means we believe that even when things don't go our way, God still has a good plan. When we finally surrender control, we begin to realize how much energy we've wasted trying to figure everything out on our own. We start to see how much unnecessary stress we've carried. And we begin to experience a new kind of freedom, one that comes from knowing that God is in control and we don't have to be. One of the hardest things for us to do is wait. We live in a world that runs on instant results, fast food, same-day delivery, instant messaging. We've been trained to expect things to happen quickly, and when they don't, we feel frustrated, anxious, or even discouraged. But God doesn't operate on our timeline. He has His own schedule, His own perfect way of unfolding things, and no amount of rushing, worrying, or stressing will change that. The problem is we often think we know what's best. We set deadlines in our minds, and when God doesn't meet them, we start questioning whether He's really listening. We pray for a breakthrough, but when nothing happens right away, we assume something's wrong. We believe for a promotion, a relationship, a financial breakthrough, or healing, and when the answer doesn't come on our schedule, we start to doubt. But what we fail to realize is that God sees the bigger picture. He knows the right time, the right place, and the right way to bring things into our lives. Think about a seed planted in the ground. You can't rush the process. You can water it, make sure it gets sunlight, and take care of the soil. But no matter how hard you try, you can't force that seed to sprout before it's ready. If you dig it up too soon, you'll ruin it. The same is true with God's timing. There are things in our lives that require a process, things that need to develop, mature, and grow before we see the results. And if we try to force something before it's time, we'll end up with something incomplete, something not fully formed, something that isn't what God intended. One of the biggest mistakes we make is comparing our timeline to someone else's. We see other people getting married, getting new jobs, buying houses, launching businesses, and stepping into new seasons of life, and we wonder, why not me? We start to think that because it's happening for them, it should be happening for us too. But comparison is dangerous because it makes us doubt God's plan for our own lives. Just because someone else's blessing came sooner doesn't mean yours isn't on the way. Their journey is not your journey. Their timing is not your timing. And most importantly, God's plan for you is uniquely designed for you. So, another reason we struggle to trust God's timing is that we often mistake waiting for wasting time. We think that if something isn't happening right now, then nothing is happening at all. But let me tell you, God is always working. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean things aren't shifting behind the scenes. Sometimes God is preparing you for what you've been praying for. Other times, He's moving the right people, arranging the right circumstances, and setting things in place so that when the time comes, everything falls into alignment perfectly. Waiting is not easy. It can feel frustrating. It can feel lonely. It can make you question if you heard God correctly. But the truth is, God is never late. He is never off schedule, and He is never caught by surprise. Everything He does is intentional, and every delay serves a greater purpose. The key is to stay in faith even when you don't understand. Because in the end, His timing will always prove to be better than anything you could have planned on your own. Worry is one of the most common struggles we face, and yet it is one of the most useless things we can do. We spend so much of our time worrying about our future, our finances, our health, our families, our jobs. We sit up at night playing out worst-case scenarios in our minds, thinking that if we just worry long enough, maybe we'll figure out a solution. But here's the truth. Worry doesn't change anything except us. It won't fix the problem. It won't make things better. All it does is steal our peace, drain our energy, and make us miserable. The Bible tells us not to worry, but if we're honest, that's easier said than done. Sometimes we try to justify it. Well, I'm just a worrier. That's just how I am. Or we convince ourselves that worrying is somehow productive. If I don't think about it constantly, then maybe I'm being irresponsible. But the truth is, worry isn't responsibility, it's a distraction. It keeps our focus on the problem instead of the one who can actually do something about it. Think about it. Has worrying ever solved a single problem in your life? Has it ever made a situation better? No. All it does is add more stress to the situation. Worry makes us feel overwhelmed. It clouds our judgment. It makes us irrational, emotional, and reactive. Instead of making wise decisions, we end up making decisions based on fear. And fear never leads us to the right place. Another thing about worry is that it often makes things seem worse than they really are. Our minds have a way of magnifying problems, making them bigger than they actually are. We start with one small concern, and before we know it, we've created an entire disaster in our minds. We imagine every possible bad outcome, every worst-case scenario, and we convince ourselves that everything is falling apart, even when it's not. Worry distorts reality. It keeps us focused on the negative, making it impossible to see the good things God is doing. And let's talk about the physical effects of worry. It wears us out. It causes stress, fatigue, headaches, muscle tension, and even sickness. When we live in a constant state of worry, our bodies suffer. God didn't create us to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. That's why worry feels so heavy, because we were never meant to carry it in the first place. The truth is, worry is a form of misplaced trust. When we worry, we are putting more faith in the problem than in God. We are saying, I'm not sure God can handle this, so I need to stress about it myself. But God is not sitting in heaven wringing his hands wondering how he's going to take care of you. He already has the solution before you even knew there was a problem. Worry is also a thief. It steals our joy. It robs us of our ability to enjoy the present moment because we are too busy stressing about the future. How many moments have we missed because we are too distracted by worry? How many times have we let anxiety steal our peace, keeping us from enjoying the blessings we already have? Worry doesn't add to our lives, it only takes away. And the crazy thing is, most of the things we worry about never even happen. Studies have shown that the majority of our fears are completely unfounded. We spend hours, days, even years worrying about things that will never come to pass. And even when challenges do come, God always provides a way through. He has never failed us before, and he's not about to start now. Instead of worrying, we need to shift our focus. We need to remind ourselves that God is in control, that he loves us, and that he is working on our behalf. When we truly believe that, we can let go of the anxiety and rest in his peace. But as long as we keep trying to handle everything ourselves, we will continue to live in a cycle of worry, stress, and fear. Life can feel like a constant battle. Some days it seems like everything is coming against us. Problems at work, conflicts in relationships, financial struggles, health issues, emotional burdens. And when these challenges pile up, we start to feel exhausted, drained, and overwhelmed. We try to fight through it on our own, using our own strength, our own strategies, and our own willpower. But the truth is, we were never meant to fight these battles alone. God is fighting for you. The problem is, we don't always believe it. We may say we trust God, But when difficulties arise, we act as if everything depends on us. We stress, we worry, we overanalyze, we try to figure out every possible solution, making backup plans for our backup plans. We carry burdens we were never meant to carry, all because we think we have to handle it ourselves. But God is saying, you don't have to fight this battle alone. Let me handle it. One of the biggest tricks of the enemy is to make us think that we are in this fight by ourselves. He wants us to feel alone, abandoned, and outnumbered. He wants us to believe that no one is coming to help us, that there's no way out, and that we have to fix everything on our own. But let me remind you, God never leaves his people unprotected. He never sends us into battle alone. He is right there working behind the scenes, fighting for us in ways we cannot see. Sometimes the reason we struggle so much is that we're fighting battles that belong to God. We're swinging our fists, wearing ourselves out, trying to fix things, change people, and control situations that are beyond our power. And all the while, God is saying, if you would just step back and let me take over, I will fight this for you. But we keep pushing, striving, and struggling, not realizing that our real strength comes from surrendering, not from striving. Think about the battles you've faced in your life. The moments where you thought you weren't going to make it. The times you felt backed into a corner with no way out. And yet here you are. Somehow, some way, God brought you through. He opened doors that should have stayed shut. He provided when there was no provision. He made a way when there was no way. You didn't win those battles on your own. God was fighting for you. The problem is, when we're in the middle of the fight, we don't always see what God is doing. We don't always feel his presence. Sometimes it seems like nothing is happening, like our prayers aren't being answered, like the situation is only getting worse. And in those moments, doubt starts to creep in. We wonder, is God really with me? Does he really care? But just because you don't see God working doesn't mean he isn't working. Think about an army preparing for battle. The soldiers don't just rush in without a plan. There are strategies, positioning, and movements happening behind the scenes that the enemy doesn't even see coming. In the same way God is orchestrating things on your behalf that you can't even begin to imagine, he is moving things, shifting circumstances, and arranging people in ways that you may never fully understand. And let's be clear, when God fights for you, he never loses. He's never been defeated. He's never been outmatched. He's never been caught off guard. The battles that seem impossible for you are no challenge for him. What looks like a mountain to you is nothing more than a pebble to God. What seems like a dead end to you is just the beginning of his breakthrough. But here's the key. You have to trust him enough to let him fight for you. Too often we get in the way of our own victory. We step into battles that were never meant for us. We take matters into our own hands thinking we have to force things to happen. And in doing so, we actually make things harder for ourselves. But when we step back and say, God, I trust you. I know you are fighting for me. I'm going to rest in your strength instead of relying on my own. That's when we experience real peace. God has already gone before you. He has already made a way. He is not surprised by your situation, and he is not worried about the outcome. He sees the attacks, the challenges, and the obstacles, and he already has a plan to bring you through. You don't have to live in fear, anxiety, or exhaustion. You don't have to keep fighting battles in your own strength, because the battle is not yours, it belongs to the Lord. One of the hardest things for us to do is let go. We like to be in control. We like to feel like we have a say in how things turn out. We plan, we strategize, we overthink, and we work ourselves to exhaustion trying to make things happen. But sometimes the best thing we can do, the thing that will bring the most peace, the most joy, the most breakthrough, is to simply let go and rest in faith. But letting go isn't easy. We hold on to things so tightly because we're afraid of what will happen if we don't. We hold on to our worries, thinking that if we let them go, things will spiral out of control. We hold on to our problems, thinking that if we don't keep stressing about them, nothing will change. We hold on to our past hurts, thinking that if we let go, we're somehow saying that what happened was okay. But the truth is, holding on isn't helping you. It's hurting you. Have you ever tried to hold on to something so tightly that your hand started to cramp? The longer you squeeze, the more painful it gets. Eventually your muscles get tired, your hand starts to shake, and you realize that the only way to relieve the pain is to just let go. That's exactly what happens when we refuse to let go in life. We think we're helping ourselves by holding on, but in reality, we're just making things harder. God never intended for you to carry all of these burdens. He never asked you to figure everything out on your own. In fact, he tells us over and over in his word to cast our cares on him, to trust him, to rest in his promises. But instead of doing that, we hold on. We let our minds run wild with worry. We replay conversations in our heads, overanalyzing every detail. We exhaust ourselves trying to control situations that are completely out of our hands. And all the while, God is saying, why are you holding on to something that I'm asking you to give to me? Resting in faith doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you ignore your responsibilities. It simply means you stop trying to force things to happen in your own strength. It means you stop working yourself into exhaustion trying to do what only God can do. It means you trust that God's plan is better than yours. His timing is perfect, and his ways are higher than your ways. The problem is we don't always believe that. We say we trust God, but then we keep trying to handle things ourselves. We pray about a situation, but then we immediately pick it back up again, stressing over it like we never prayed in the first place. We say, God, I trust you, but then we spend the whole night worrying. That's not faith, that's fear. Faith means we surrender. Faith means we stop striving and start resting. Think about the disciples when they were in the boat with Jesus. A storm came and the waves started crashing against them. The disciples panicked. They were worried, anxious, and afraid. But where was Jesus? He was asleep. In the middle of the storm, he was completely at peace. Why? Because he knew his Father was in control. He knew that no matter how bad things looked, he didn't need to worry. And that's the kind of faith God wants us to have. A faith that says, even when everything around me seems chaotic, I will rest. Because I know that God is in control. Resting in faith doesn't mean everything will change overnight. It doesn't mean you won't face challenges. But it does mean you don't have to carry the weight of those challenges on your own. It means you can wake up in the morning and say, God, I don't know how this situation is going to turn out, but I trust you. I don't have all the answers, but I trust you. I don't see the full picture, but I trust you. There is a deep peace that comes when we finally let go. A peace that cannot be shaken by circumstances. A peace that doesn't depend on everything going perfectly. A peace that comes from knowing that you don't have to figure it all out because God already has a plan. But You can't experience that peace until you make the decision to truly let go, to stop striving, to stop overthinking, to stop worrying, to stop trying to control what is out of your hands. Because the moment you release it, the moment you stop carrying it, that's the moment God can step in and do what only He can do. So many people today are searching for peace. They try to find it in relationships, in money, in success, in achievements, in material things. But no matter how much they chase after, it always seems just out of reach. They think if I could just get this promotion, I would finally feel at peace. Or if I could just get married, then I would be happy. But here's the truth. Real, lasting peace doesn't come from circumstances. It comes from obedience to God. When we obey God, we align ourselves with His perfect plan. We step into the path that He has already prepared for us. And in that place, there is peace. That doesn't mean life will always be easy. It doesn't mean we won't face struggles or challenges. But what it does mean is that we don't have to live in turmoil, worry, or confusion because we are walking in God's will. The problem is, obedience isn't always easy. Sometimes God asks us to do things that don't make sense in the moment. He asks us to forgive someone who hurt us deeply. He asks us to step out in faith when we don't see the full picture. He asks us to let go of something we thought we needed. And in those moments, we have a choice. We can obey and trust Him, or we can resist and do things our own way. Many times we choose our own way because we think we know best. We let our emotions lead us instead of God's wisdom. We hold on to bitterness because we think forgiveness is too hard. We stay in relationships God is telling us to leave because we're afraid of being alone. We ignore His voice because we don't want to change. But what we fail to realize is that disobedience always leads to unrest. Disobedience always leads to unrest. Think about it. When you know deep down that God is asking you to do something and you refuse, there's an uneasiness that follows. There's an inner conflict, a lack of peace. No matter how much you try to justify your actions, something inside you knows you're not doing the right thing. That's because when we resist God, we are resisting peace. But when we obey, there is freedom. There is a lifting of the burden, a release from the struggle. Even when obedience is hard, even when it requires sacrifice, there is peace in knowing that we are walking in God's will. We may not see the outcome right away, but we can rest in the assurance that God's way is always the best way. One of the biggest obstacles to obedience is fear. We hesitate to obey because we're afraid of what might happen. What if I lose something? What if I fail? What if this isn't the right decision? But here's what we need to remember. God sees what we cannot see. He knows what's ahead. He knows the dangers we are walking toward, the opportunities we are about to miss, the blessings He wants to bring into our lives. And when He calls us to obey, it's always for our good. Think about a parent giving instructions to a child. The child may not always understand why they have to go to bed early, why they can't eat candy all day, or why they need to listen to certain rules. But the parent knows things the child doesn't know. The parent sees the bigger picture. In the same way, God gives us instructions not to control us, but to protect us, to guide us and to bring us peace. The world tells us that peace comes from doing whatever we want, following our hearts and making our own rules. But the truth is, when we ignore God's guidance, we only create more stress, more chaos, and more regret in our lives. The peace we are searching for will never come from doing things our own way. It will only come when we surrender to God's way. And here's the beautiful thing, God is patient with us. Even when we've disobeyed, even when we've gone in the wrong direction, He is always ready to lead us back. He doesn't hold our mistakes against us. He doesn't give up on us. He simply says, trust me, follow me, walk in obedience, and you will find peace. Obedience isn't about following a list of rules. It's about trusting that God knows what is best for us. It's about choosing to follow Him even when it's difficult. It's about surrendering our will and embracing His plan. And when we do that, we discover that true peace isn't found in getting everything we want. It's found in walking closely with the one who knows what we need. We all have plans for our lives. We have dreams, goals, and ideas of how things should go. We map out our future thinking, by this age I'll have this job. By this time I'll be married. By this point I'll have a certain amount of money saved. We try to control our path, making decisions based on what we think is best. But how many times has life gone differently than we expected? How many times have things not worked out the way we planned? And in those moments, we feel frustrated, disappointed, and even discouraged. The truth is, our plans will never be better than God's plans. We may think we know what's best for us, but we see only a small piece of the picture. God sees the whole thing. We make decisions based on our limited understanding, but God knows the future. We focus on what feels good in the moment, but God's plan is about what's best for the long run. One of the biggest struggles we face is letting go of our own plans and trusting that God's way is better. We want things to happen in our own timing. We want things to go according to our own script. And when things don't go the way we expected, we get upset. We question God. We wonder if He's forgotten about us. But the reality is, God isn't ignoring us. He's protecting us. He's leading us. He's redirecting us towards something far greater than we could ever imagine. How many times have you looked back at your life and thought, I'm so glad God didn't give me what I asked for? Maybe you wanted a certain job, but now you realize it wouldn't have been right for you. Maybe you wanted a particular relationship to work out, but now you see that God had something better. In the moment, it was painful, but now you see the wisdom in God's plan. What we think is a setback is often just a setup for something greater. But trusting God's plan isn't always easy. When we don't see things happening the way we want, we start to doubt. We try to take matters into our own hands. We try to force doors open that God has closed. We try to manipulate situations to get the outcome we want. And in doing so, we only create more stress, more heartache, and more frustration. Think about Sarah and Abraham. God promised them a child, but when it didn't happen in their timing, they took things into their own hands. Sarah told Abraham to have a child with Hagar, thinking she was helping God's plan along, but instead of making things better, it created conflict, pain, and division. When we try to rush God's plan, we only make things harder for ourselves. God's plan is often different from ours, but it is never worse than ours. It is always greater, higher, and far beyond what we can imagine. The problem is we often judge God's plan based on how things look right now. If things aren't going our way, we assume that something is wrong. But just because we don't see the full picture doesn't mean God isn't working. Just because things feel uncertain doesn't mean God isn't in control. Think about Joseph. God had given him a dream that he would be in a position of great influence. But before that dream became a reality, he was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. From the outside, it looked like everything was going wrong. If Joseph had judged God's plan based on how things looked in the moment, he would have thought God had abandoned him. But God was working the whole time. Every setback was actually a setup. Every disappointment was a part of the process. And in the end, Joseph's dream came true, but it happened in God's way and in God's timing. God, and that's the challenge for us. We have to trust not only that God has a plan, but that his plan is better than anything we could come up with on our own. We have to be willing to let go of what we think is best and surrender to what God knows is best. That means trusting him when things don't make sense. That means staying faithful even when we don't see results. That means believing that even when life doesn't go the way we planned, God is still in control. One of the hardest things for us to do is to release our own plans. But the moment we let go, we open ourselves up to something greater. When we stop striving, stop forcing, stop stressing, and start trusting, that's when we experience the fullness of God's plan. Because God's plan isn't just about giving us what we want. It's about giving us what we need. It's about shaping us, growing us, and leading us into a future that is far beyond anything we could imagine.